Well, good morning, everybody, on this Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. And it's so important for us to remember that the story of the Exodus inspired the whole civil rights movement, and his speech was so much a part of taken right out of Toyrah. I wasn't thinking about this day when I wrote this. So I have to at least dedicate it to his memory. And it should be for further freedom and liberation of all people who are oppressed. And the overarching theme of Exodus is how we formalize our identity. Before we receive the Torah, which is the defining element of Jewish people, we have to reject what is not us. And that's with all identities. We try on what we think we are, and then we realize it's not us, and then we figure it out who we are. But it's a process. And this story is all about that process. And with all oppression, there's a Pharaoh who is an abuser. So the plight of the slaves is like finding your way out of a bad marriage. You complain when you're in a bad marriage, and then Pharaoh just gets tougher with you. And he sees you're unhappy and you want to leave, and then he gets more restrictive. And finally, the abuse is so bad that it becomes life-threatening. And you know you don't have to stay in an abusive situation. And you know that if you do, you're going to die and you want to live. So you finally gain the strength and resolve to leave. And then, for a while, you experiment with different things. Think of the golden calf. And you realize that doesn't work either. You get a little pleasure, but it's not really you. And then you realize that there's this other way of being, which is defined by certain standards of behaviors. And this is gradually you build your character and you find happiness in being you. And the first step is to demand that the abuser let you go. And the abuser doesn't want to let you go. So you have to make a break any way you can. And with faith and trust, knowing that there's a higher source of protection and direction. Egyptian culture had many gods. Each natural element was ruled by a god, and the Nile was the chief one, which represented sustenance and abundance. Pharaoh thought himself to be a god, so he resisted the threats from Moses's gods. In spite of the suffering brought on by the plagues, Pharaoh hardened his heart, and then God strengthened it in order to prove to Egypt who was the real powerful God. If he had folded under duress, victory wouldn't have meant much. This is the source of the three descriptions of Kasheh, Chazak, and Kaved. Those are the three descriptions of how Pharaoh's heart was hard, then it was strong, and then it was heavy. And these three words are very telling in this story. So hardening, strengthening, and making the heart heavy are akin to addiction. First, the addict has a hard and fast desire for a substance. He can take it or leave it, but his resolve is strengthened despite the chaos the addiction brings. And finally, the addict is brought down heavily because there's no distinction between his identity and the addiction. Pharaoh refused to back down until he was brought down hard and heavy. Nachmanides posits that had Pharaoh let the slaves go on account of the plagues, it wouldn't have been through his free will. It's akin to giving up your wallet to a mugger holding a gun to your back. So God made Pharaoh's heart heavy to give him the opportunity to make his decision freely. And since he chose to hold on to his slaves, he truly earned the divine retribution for his shameful behavior. We attribute God's involvement when things happen that are beyond nature. As evil as Pharaoh was, his refusal to let the Hebrew slaves free after his people and country were destroyed through the plagues seems unfathomable. Thereby, one could only conclude that God must have made Pharaoh's heart heavy. And then there's another this I found really cool. Another aspect of this heart being made heavy. The plagues attacked the Egyptian gods. The Nile, as I said, was the greatest of them. And the ultimate takedown of Pharaoh as God was to make his heart heavy, because in Egyptian culture, after your death, your heart is weighed against a feather. And with a heavy heart, he was not going to fare well in the afterlife. So, who are our modern day pharaohs? Can we ever list them? The list just seems to grow every day. They're the despots, they're the people who are prejudiced, and they just have this need for power. And it's hardened and then strengthened by their ascension to power and holding on to it. They don't see, or if they do, they just don't show any care that people are living in poverty and suffering, not getting their basic needs met, and that the earth is being destroyed through their greed. Then on a lesser level, but still significant, we can look at our own inner Pharaoh. What do we hold on to, disregarding the consequences? Do we consider how our actions affect others and our environment? How do we free ourselves from this destructive behavior? What makes us hold on to it so? Why don't we listen to reason? Why do we stay in our like a rat in maze mentality? This is our inner Pharaoh, keeping us from finding our authenticity. Our destructive behaviors keep us in that uncomfortable place. The lesson is to connect our inner Moses by being present, to focus on what and who is before us, and to act with kindness, no matter what, always certain that God is with us. Divarti.